Done it is.
I want to share my story so I can help.
Understand that it's okay to not be okay.
It's time to talk. It's time to change.
When I played football, that was my language. That's how I communicated. And when that was taken away from me, I just felt like I was nothing. I was no one.
You know, you got so much responsibility as an athlete to your team. You know, you got to play at a certain level, and your teammates counting on you. You got the pressure from the media.
I want to share my story so I can help.
The highs and
Understand that it's okay to not be okay.
It's time to talk.
It's cope with the lows that is the most difficult part.
When I played football, that was my language.
You know, I got into my state, it hit me like a brick.
Was that because
I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want anyone to think differently of me.
When I was playing rugby, my feet were not planted deep, they were shallow. Anything was knocking me around, and I felt like it was a balancing act. I had to fight against this, fight against this, fight against this, and hold on and survive and, you know, win a game, and it was just, thank God for that, let's move on.
I suffer from depression. Depression is with me on a daily basis. It is time for sport to accept its responsibility with this issue.
There's records, there's numbers that I'm really close to. And of course, I feel pressure, but I will play, I will fight, and I will keep going on.
And my thoughts of wanting to take my life, they don't define me, and they will never define me, and they'll never win.
Struggles are going to happen in life. You know, you're going to get punched in the mouth at some point, but understand that you can get back up, dust yourself off, and get back out there.
And everybody's going through something, and everybody, you know, has things that you can't see, you can't touch, that, you know, they're walking around with every day.
If your eyes hurt and you go to the opticians, if your head's hurt and you go and see someone about mental health, it'd be nice just to let it out rather than keeping it in. Because the more you keep it in, the more you explode.
I don't know why I opened up and talked about it, but I guess I was just sick and tired of just having it inside of me for 20 plus years, and I was ready to make a change.
I'm glad I got through it.
She's an ultimate champion, the top of her sport.
If you think you are the GOAT, quitting is unacceptable.
How dare you call her a quitter?
It is confirmed it is not injury related.
This might be a mental health thing. Where is that coming from?
My childhood and everything that's happened to me.
You have no idea what's going on.
We'd love to get your take. There are a lot of eyes, obviously, on Naomi Osaka. She's put a lot of attention on mental health and the strain that it takes. And even, you know, during the Olympics, we talked a lot about mental health. What's your take on what some of these young athletes are dealing with?
Why do you think I yelled all the time? You know, it was.
Listen.
It was better than that, than crying in a way. You know, as a guy almost. But as far as Naomi goes, I commend her, and you know, I think what she did was great. The part that I worry about is that there's going to be now extra scrutiny on her instead of less scrutiny.
I said the same thing.
And she's an introverted, shy person to begin with. So all of a sudden, what she thought was a good thing, and most of us did, went from bad to worse at the French Open because all of a sudden they were going to fine her, and she said, fine me, but I'll give it to charity. Great idea. Then these tennis powers that beat said, well, maybe we're going to default her. Bad idea. You know, then she pulled out. Lose for tennis, lose for her. The pressure would mount, it appears. So I worry about that aspect of it because she's the best hardcore player in the world. I mean, if she plays her best, she's going to win this tournament.
Wow, that's the
You have to be at a team lift at 6 a.m.,
but you're accidentally 1 minute late because you slept through your alarm. Your heart's pounding from sprinting to the gym, but nobody cares that it's because you were up until 2 a.m. studying for an exam that you still don't feel prepared for. You can feel the tension between you and your teammates who now have to run sprints tomorrow at 6 a.m. because you were 1 minute late. You start the lift, and your mind's just not in the right place, but it doesn't matter. You have to lift. And as soon as it's over, you scarf down breakfast on your way to 8 a.m. class, and you get there, and your hair's still wet because you didn't have time to dry it. The professor looks at you and says, "Where's the homework assignment?" But you forgot it. How could you forget it? You were supposed to be on top of everything, so you sit there and you worry about what else you might have forgot. And at noon, you get a 30-minute break, but it's not really a break because you use it to quickly make up an assignment you missed for last week's game. And soon, it's 12:10, and to you, 40 minutes does not feel like enough time to get on the court and be ready, even though it actually is. So you head over, and at 1, practice is starting. And you have to forget everything that happened in your day, because at practice, you have to perform. You can't not perform. There's someone better than you, someone competing with you, and someone in high school who just committed to be you. So forget the 0 on your assignment. Forget the test you're not prepared for. Forget the friends you haven't seen in weeks. Forget the argument you've been in with your parent. Play well, pass well, perform. And when it's finally over, you find yourself staring in the locker room mirror, trying not to cry. And you ask yourself, is this how I'm supposed to feel? My name is Victoria Garrick, and I play volleyball here at USC.
Shocked when you write that the NCAA released some statistics that suicide ranks as the 3rd most frequent cause of death for student athletes.
Yeah.
That's behind cardiac issues and accidents.
Yep.
I mean, are universities not doing enough to prioritize mental health of their student athletes?
I think it's the next frontier where they can do more. And I think they know this. I mean, I just got back from the Big East Mental Health Summit, like first of its kind. More athletic departments are realizing that they haven't done enough and that they need to do more. Athletic departments are starting to move in the right direction. And even that suicide number you mentioned, 3rd leading cause for student athletes, I always try to point out that that's lower than it is for the general population. Like, student athletes are struggling more than they ever have with anxiety and depression, and the numbers from 20 years ago, they're higher. But for the general population, student athletes are still lower, and the numbers are growing across the board, but it's a really tough time for young people for like a lot of different reasons.
Okay, thank you so much for that, and welcome. Today, the topic is mental health for Mental Health Awareness Month this month, but in particular in the world of athletics. So that's our discussion. Thank you for joining. My name is Phoenyx. We are here in recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month. Speaking within the world of sports, conversation has been recently quite popular, as you can see from some of the videos that we showed just previous to me coming on. We even have representatives within the pro world that are now representing and partnering up with different mental health platforms like Simone Biles with Cerebral and Michael Phelps, who's been with Talkspace for a few years. So we're going to get into it. I have special guests here who are in the athletic world and also in the coaching world who are here to share their experience. I'm very excited to have them here. I want to take the time first to introduce them and allow them to share just a brief introduction of themselves so that you have an idea of who it is that we have on our panel. So I'll start with Kaylin Payne. So your focus is in an area of sports that I love, track and field. Every time the Olympics comes out, I make sure to watch the track events, especially the very fast ones. So you love to run. And if you don't mind sharing with us, what got you into running?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. So yes, I am a track and field, well, I'm a former track and field athlete. Now I coach, but what really got me into it was an experience I had when I was younger. So I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and there they have Little League sports. And I had the opportunity to be seen by a running coach during a cheerleading practice where they kept making me rerun a lap because no one thought I had done it. And someone was like, wait, she's fast. And then they recruited me over into track, and I've loved it ever since.
That sounds amazing. So then you had a really cute story as far as that's concerned. Now that you are older and in the coaching capacity, what's that like for you? Like, how is that, like, I guess, imparting that knowledge that you had from your previous years to the kids that you work with now?
It's super rewarding. When I had to end my track and field journey for myself being a competitive athlete, I didn't really know what to do with all of that. And so having the opportunity to coach, having the opportunity to help guide someone else's journey kind of regave me a purpose. I know it sounds silly to say, I lost my identity when I lost track as my sport, but the way I reclaimed it was by helping others either do it just because they enjoy it and or prepare themselves for hopefully being able to run in college.
Right. And, and that's not a weird thing to say at all, right? Because someone within the video that we just saw said the same thing about her being in, well, she referred to it as football, but she was talking about soccer, but then being in that area, and then when she left that area, not knowing what to do, and how many times do we hear about that, like different athletes who give their life to this sport or give their life to what it is that they're doing. And then once they're coming out of it, this is a really normal thing, right? So then, that's a good point. And I think that we'll probably touch on that a bit later. Okay, thank you for that, Kaylin. So then we'll go now to, and Sam, okay, I'm gonna try it. Akinrinade.
Nailed it.
Perfect. Okay, so I am reading off the paper because just impressed with you have a very impressive and diverse athletic resume. So with a background in football, and as a semi-pro athlete, you have Muay Thai on your resume, Kung Fu, weightlifting, and track. So that's actually how we met. I don't know if you remember, so that we actually went to your Tribe Called Sprinters training, which was amazing. And I'd taken my fitness team there to pick up on some different ways to diversify their workouts. So that was great. So if you could speak, though, since we have you here, a little bit on your football experience.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, my football experience, started back in high school, like you mentioned, and I got as far as semi-pro, level, which is pretty much a nice way of saying playing for free. But yeah, and I played through college, Wagner College out in Staten Island, which is Division 1 AA school at the time. And pretty much my experience with, at least with football, was enlightening. Like I love football, I love the sport. But just like a lot of sports, there's a lot of pressures, right? Like in terms of performance, and alongside a few others, like football has that connotation of being a tough guy sport, and working through injury, and being there for your teammates and all that. Great character builder, but there's a lot of stuff athletes have to deal with, especially with a sport as tough as football, mentally and on your body.
Sure. And that's a good segue then going into what it was that I wanted to speak on first. So as far as, the reasons why I wanted to focus on different areas, like with you, Kaylin, like with track, I feel like it's a very rigorous training because it's not something that's in a team atmosphere, right? So then it's something that you train and you really have to be in your head about a lot of times when it comes to how fast you are, what it is, and when you're competing with not only the people that are in other lanes from you, but yourself. And then like with you, Sam, then you are also training, but then within that team atmosphere, and that can sometimes be, it's supposed to be a great thing, but can also be something that could be a negative, because then if people are coming in at you talking about, well, this person is doing this, why can't you do this? And so then you're measuring yourself up against some of the people that are on your team as well. So then when you competed, did you feel, you kind of touched on that, Sam, as far as that mental pressure, and this is for both of you, when you felt that mental pressure and why? What is it that you felt like was on the line? Did you have a support system within your coaching staff, within your school? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for me, yes, there was a lot of pressure, and I think most of the at least in high school, if I'm starting on that early on, and most of the initial pressure kind of comes from performing initially, because, just like a lot of team sports, you're at some point you're competing, with the guy next to you for a spot, right? That's or you're going to compete just to even make the team, right? And then there's that pressure to obviously, like, when you do get that starting job, right? Like, to justify why you were given that spot, right? Like, because next guy up, sort of a thing. And then along with that is the in a highly competitive sport like football, your best ability is your availability. So oftentimes people work through injury, or if if you're injured, you have this anxiety that you're done, or you may not get your spot back. And then for me, going into, I guess, my senior year, if you get to a certain level and you realize, and you start to get eyes on you in terms of the college prospects and recruiters, all of a sudden they're in the stands, right? So now there's this new added pressure of performing for these potential colleges, right? My parents are like, they told me early on, you're gonna have to get a scholarship and take out loans because we have no money, right? So now you're working for a scholarship, right? So there's just a lot of these added pressures, and we haven't even talked about the pressures that your coaches put on you, and on your time and so forth.
Sure.
I have some similar experiences. So I started running very early, and my family in general tended to stay involved in sports. So the reason I ended up in cheerleading was because my brothers were playing football and they needed somewhere for me to go. And so there weren't a lot of sports for girls to begin with. Cheerleading was something that I could do when it was at the same time. But the fun that I had when I was 7, 8, 9 running, I was naturally talented. So in a lot of ways, the pressure started in junior high, when all of a sudden, I think you would train harder and you would practice harder to be the fastest kid on your team, because kind of like any other sport, you wanted to be the person that got put into the races, right? Like, everyone can't run the 400 meters. Everyone can't run the 2. They're taking the top 4, top 5 on the team. And you always want to make sure that the events that you want to run, you are the best on your team so that you do get the chance. I had a lot of pressure in high school because I became varsity freshman year. And so walking into a freshman experience with everything that you have to learn about high school and all of those changes, and then needing to compete with girls who were seniors and juniors who had already kind of knew the routines and the rigors, it was a lot. And then also I changed schools over the summer. So I had to do a lot of catch up with training and practices between to make sure that I would be where I wanted to be on the team. So I think that when you think of the pressures from the school, you're trying to, I was in the same situation as Sam, scholarship or loans. I also went to a public school, where athletes tend to be a lot more competitive, in my experience, than some of the private schools we competed against. And we're all trying to get those scholarships, and we're all trying to be our best. And so you get the pressure from yourself, you get the pressure from your team, because if you're anchoring the 400-meter relay and someone has kind of gotten behind, they expect you to go get it. There's no excuses. You're injured, you tape up, you get back out there, because A, your coaches say, Payne, get it back out there. And B, you want to be able to get out there, because if you miss too many races, then someone else sneaks in and can climb in and take your place. So my tricky part to my whole entire high school sporting experience is I grew up in foster care. So I lived in 9 homes during my high school year. So I had to eventually keep finding ways to get to school, to be able to stay at the same school so that I could keep building on what I had been doing. So there were days where I would have to either walk or figure out a cab or taxi situation to be able to get to the school that I had started competing at to be able to stay there to graduate. So that was just an extra stress. And I also had a job.
Wow. And that, I mean, I think is just a testament of what it is that, especially like we talk about now, that our kids deal with, that we aren't always privy to, right? So, and you had that extra dynamic. So in talking about that, and again, this question is for both of you, because now the mental health and mental wellness conversation is a much more open conversation now. And when it comes to athletes and when it comes to athletics, as it was as to when we were growing up. So then even when I was reading and researching, they were talking about that, how, before, like, we weren't able to Google because Google wasn't around. But then, if we were, and we were trying to look for this information, we wouldn't have been able to find that information, athletes related to mental wellness, whereas now it is a very, prominent thing. So when you were competing and when you were in school during that time, were there conversations about, maybe you didn't label it as anxiety or you didn't label it as depression, but were there conversations around that, and how are you feeling, or anything that was in regard to your mental health?
For me, there were no conversations in the high school experience. Most of the conversations were that I did have with my counselor, who was a great guy, lovely Mr. Jelinek. I will never forget him because he was so supportive, right? But then there was also the push. So he was that person that was like, you need to apply for this scholarship, you need to, be in career services, you need to do all these things. How's sports going? How are you doing there? Well, you need to go apply for these things. So he was very helpful, he kept me organized, but we never talked about the stress and the mental capacity. He was very much one of the only faculty at my school really aware of my living situation, my family situation. It was something that I didn't openly talk about. It was not something that was superly positive, to be a foster kid and not, and all those things. So I tried to kind of like keep all of that separate, and then try to use the training and the sports to kind of like process that. That backfired in college, by the way. You can only take so much before you need to to find a different way to deal with things instead of holding it in. And when I got to college, there was a little bit more conversation, but no action. It was kind of like, you need to suck this up. This is what everyone else is dealing with. Everyone else is dealing with the same thing, and it's not true. No two people are ever dealing with the same thing, but this is what you're told, and you don't want to be the complainer, and you don't want to be cut. So you wake up at 5, you do doubles, you go to class, you cry at night.
Yeah, I got to piggyback on everything Kaylin just said. Like, and I guess to answer the question in terms of like any conversations about mental health coming up, big hell no. Like, you know what I mean? Like, especially to me too, like coming from, I'm Nigerian American, right? And like, at least like, coming from like, my mom, I can count how many times, like, I hugged my mom after the age of like 10, right? Like in terms of just, always just kind of being like internally tough, right? Like, and not complaining, right? And, on to the next one sort of mentality. And then when you couple that like with, of course I decided to go into like some of the, like the quote unquote tough guy, like, type of sports. Right. Like, the only time things mental health related really was like, if you got your bell rung or if you were having like with, sometimes confidence issues, right? Like, and that's probably the extent of it, right? Otherwise, like, it's like suck it up, like man up, was usually like, the de facto response. But yeah, just like Kaylin, right? Like, it's one of those things where you may have someone privately that you confide in and, you can open up to. But it definitely wasn't anything like, you made people aware. Like, in fact, like I was more likely to keep it to myself, right? Like, coming up.
Okay, yeah, and that's a good point. It's a good segue. So I'm going to go now to another clip that's related to how it was that we saw things and what it was that you guys are mentioning. And if you'll give me a minute, because I'm going to share my screen.
Quantify that. It's not like an ACL tear where it's like.
What am I
Oh, that's lovely.
looking at here?
This is what
We have
great
a
sleep looks
commercial
like.
in our
What, this giant waffle?
Yeah,
Weird. Tell me more.
it's called the Purple Mattress.
Okay.
Like, hey, like, you know, like, oh, you tear your ACL, you should be better in 12 months. Like, you can't say that about mental health, right? So I think we're in a new frontier. Everybody's learning, everybody's understanding, but we got a really long way to go.
Speaking about that, man, I think of Calvin Ridley, who was missing games because he said mental illness. You got to take your ass to work, Ryan.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? There's bus drivers, there's dentists, there's, doctors, there's the lady at the gas station. You going through something in life, you got to take your ass to work.
So you're saying it's a Band-Aid?
Like, that's my whole thing. I don't know, and it's funny, and it's two different conversations, but the mental health and the CTE stuff, I think some people take advantage of it, and it's almost that crutch you were talking about. Like, how do we figure out if this dude is lazy or if this dude's really going through something? Like, where do you with alchemy, like, what do y'all have a way to figure that out, if what's going on there? Because I think some dudes just use it. Oh, CTE. I got CTE. I joke about it. If I forget somebody's birthday, bro, my sister's birthday just went past. I forgot it. Yeah, I CTE, and I just joke about it. But a deeper conversation, I think some people use it as
only
that
you
crutch.
would joke about that.
CTE. Yeah, all my towels built up.
Okay, I'm forwarding now to a different clip just so that we can get them both in at the same time.
This is Lumen, the first device for hacking your metabolism. With just one breath, Lumen tells you what you're
different. You got through rough times.
Up and backing them, and I sit in my house and I'm like,
they go to school, the kids, the teachers, ADHD, 501 plan, this plan, that plan. We got to get them in this. I'm like, come on, don't box them in. I don't like labels. A lot of times for me, I think labels are Band-Aids, but I also have to be cognizant and respectful of what everybody's going through because we're all different.
Right.
This is a whole new generation. I'm 30 years removed from my teenage years. You know what I'm saying? So I respect that. I don't always understand it, but I deal with it.
But isn't that where we are though? Because like I can be honest with you, and especially being in the media and having these things happen, Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, and there's a lot of times that I'm sitting on the outside and I'm watching other colleagues or other media members reach out to these people via social media and say, you're so strong, thank you for standing up and backing them. And I sit in my house and I'm like, do I need to send that tweet? Right? Do I need to show that I understand this when I don't?
What am I looking at here?
Some people like a soft mattress, right?
I do.
But some people prefer.
Right? Like, because it didn't matter how I woke up on Sunday, what I felt, what was going on in my life, to be able to make a call and say, you know what, y'all, I'm just really not feeling it today, never crossed my mind, right? Because it was never something that I felt was okay. It wasn't a way that I was raised, right? And so, like, I make fun of my kids all the time because, they listen to, like, all of these different rappers who I don't know. Everybody's a Lil and this and that, right? I don't know them, but all the Lils, right?
Lils, yeah.
But in every song, like my daughter was, I can't even remember the rapper's name, Trippie Redd, right? She was like, he's like, Coi Leray dumped him and he gave us a great album. It's so good that I don't like her now, but
like
it's a great album, right? Because he was
Yeah.
basically like depressed the whole album. And he was talking about taking pills and like how sad he was. And stupid Ryan, right, 42-year-old Ryan was like, why don't he just get a new girlfriend? Right? Because like that's how I see it. Right, but for these kids, it's okay to take the pills. It's okay to contemplate suicide. You watch 13 Reasons, 13 Reasons Why, whatever the show is where the girl commits suicide, and every time I walked in front of the TV, she was basically tormenting the people that pushed her to do that. But the truth is, if you make that decision, you don't get to come back and torment the people. You're gone.
Okay, so that's our share. I just wanted to do a soft plug that I don't know if anybody else watches that, The Pivot, that podcast, but I thought it was amazing. These guys are great. They're all retired football athletes that talk on different topics. They happen to be talking with on for Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're talking on different topics related to mental health awareness. So it's like they are all athletes, but it's not a sports podcast. They happen to have athletes on who talk about different things. So it's really great. So that's my plug. Hopefully they're watching, and then they can be like, "Oh, thank you, Phoenix, for that." But I wanted to talk a little more about that because, like, so what Ryan was talking about as far as the perspective, right? He was saying, he even referenced it to, that wasn't how I was raised. Like the option to go out there and say, yeah, I'm not feeling it today. That's how he puts it. And that's how the perception is very, very different, right? So then it's like, we come from a day where, just like both of you said, and referenced specifically, you just got to suck it up. You got to suck it up. Whatever it is that you're going through, everybody else is going through something, but you see that they're out here. So you got to suck it up. So then how is it that there was a reference that was made in one of the other videos too, that said that students are struggling more now than they ever have. And it's a tough time for young people now, which I think is quite timely, right? With what has happened just this past week with the shooting that we had in the school. So we're dealing with a different time. You remember when our grandparents were like, yeah, well, when I had to go to school, I had to walk uphill both ways. And we all used to laugh and joke about that, right? So now here we are, we're those people, and you have people who say about these kids, they're soft, they're lazy, they've got it easy. So I wanted to get you guys to kind of chime in on that. How do you feel about that? And what is it that makes this generation what it is that they have to deal with, and what makes it different?
Yeah, that's an interesting, and it's a tough one too, right? Because like you said, like I'm not, I'm like, unfortunately, like, like my dad, right? Like, or it's just like, all right, I'm like, really? Like that's, like, I don't even know if you call it first world problems, but it's like, but it's just like, it's just one of those things where I do have to, a big part of me does agree, like Ryan said, where it's like, I get it, but I don't necessarily understand it, right? In the sense that, like, if you're dealing with something like, just like, I forget that athlete's name, like, bus drivers, they got to go to work, right? Like, I guess my thing is, when it comes to some of this stuff, like, we can't put a label on or judge people for where they are, right? Like, because we don't know what they went through, right? And if they feel that, like, whatever they're going through is enough that they can't function, I'm all for that. I respect it, right? Because because to me the alternative is, if a person does say, like, look, I can't perform today, or I need to take time off from my sport, or whatever, for whatever reason, and then they get all this pressure to not, or they get this scrutiny, and then God forbid they do something that like we don't see coming, like then that's our fault now, right? Like, God, let's just say, the kid with the school shooting, like, I'm just, I don't know much about the kid, or let's just say there was a cry for help at some point that was ignored, right? Like, you could, point to the, that instance where he did seek help, and then, and it was fell on deaf ears. You can point to that as like a point of intervention that was missed, right? On the other side of it, if we do have athletes, like, let's say Simone Biles, who says, like, look, I'm dealing with a lot, and I need to take time off. And I'm just like, macro, I completely respect what she did. And I think it does take courage, especially in that sport. I don't know if people realize the amount of scrutiny that gymnastics athletes go through, and how tough that sport is on your body from an early age, right, to get to that level. We're talking about an athlete that's, top points, 1% in that sport all time. you got to think about all the years, all right, of things that she's probably had to like brush aside, keep to herself, right? That like in my mind, if it took, whatever it would cause an athlete with that much fortitude to have to be like, nah, I can't do this, right? Because we know she loves the sport, right? I'm sure, like the last Olympics, like to tear her off that beam, right? Like, and say like, she fight kicking and screaming to go out there. So you also have to take that into account, right? And respect it. And the alternative, it's my mind, is way worse.
I believe that that video hit on, both of the videos hit on some really important topics and some things that kind of made me want to like reach to the screen and slap a person. So the first thing I'll touch on is, I don't believe when someone says that someone's using depression or mental illness and or just not feeling like you are yourself as a band-aid. I think that from an outside perspective looking in, that's easy to say. And I can say this because I've had to battle my own issues with my own mental health issues throughout life, not necessarily caused by sports, but not necessarily, sports didn't help. Sports added a whole nother level of anxiety, of stress, of depression, of self-critical behavior, everything from body weight to muscle mass, to speed, to vertical jump, so there are so many things that you're thinking of. It's also not true to say that someone in an industry that's not sports, like a bus driver, has to get up and go to work anyways, because they call out all the time. I've been standing on the corner waiting for a bus, and I can promise you that person had called out. The thing is that all of these rules and laws and regulations are coming from the regular population, which is where they happen first. Those changes happened in corporate settings first, and now are going into sports where they're like, oh wait, mental health is a thing. The other thing is when you're doing a desk job and you're having a tough time, yes, taking some time to get your mental health and things together can be needed. But when you're asking yourself to be mentally strong, mental toughness, and physically strong at the same time, and you're just not there, this is where injuries and accidents and mistakes happen. You could end your career. You can really hurt yourself in a way that could be a permanent life change if your mind isn't fully in the game. And I'm not just thinking like track and field too, sure, but think of any sport. Every sport has the risk for inherent injury. And if you're already not in the mindset and now you're forcing it, we all know what it's like when you try to force concentration, let alone reaction time, agility, speed, power, and all these things are happening simultaneously. I think that people have to also be mindful that most people will never use their body in the way an athlete does. There is a reason why athletes are so impressive to watch on TV. There's a reason why people spend money for season tickets and travel to these things. It's because it is a feat of amazingness. It is a lot of things coming together that the average person couldn't do physically, let alone suffer the mental strength and toughness you need to actually get to a high level of performance. It's easy to say, oh, I did soccer in 5th grade. And that's great. But soccer at 5th grade is very, very different than soccer in college, which is very different than semi-professional soccer, which is very different than professional soccer. And I think that when people are judging or making assumptions on the state of someone else's willingness to participate in their sport, in their activity at that moment in their life, people need to step back. I know that, I had to take time away, not from track itself. That ended for other reasons, but even in my own professional, I work in fitness. There's been times where I was like, I gotta take time away. I think that it makes you better when you come back.
Exactly.
And it prolongs your longevity in it.
Exactly, yeah. And you said exactly what I was thinking too, Kaylin, like in terms of that, like, right, because the alternative is, like with Simone, if she did go out there, right, like, and then she has, like, let's say she falls off the beam, right, then the next thing everybody's like, oh, is this the end of her, you know, has she passed her prime? And like, you know, she's not what she used to be, right? And then probably she'll probably spiral even worse, right? So yeah, you know, like I said, if anybody, this is what they do, right? This is you know, for the most part, we assume that this is the sport that they love, that they've done their entire life. So you got to imagine like the pressure or the pain that they're going through to voluntarily step away, like from what that is.
And that's a good point. That's a good point, right? And then I like the analogy that you utilized, Kaylin, with relating it to what it was that they talked about in the video as far as like bus drivers and et cetera. So imagine if you had a bus driver who had your child on their bus and they weren't feeling well, and then something happened, and how unsympathetic most of us would probably be if this person just didn't take the time to take care of him or herself, right? So I mean, I think that's a very valid point, right? And I mean, even like in an article that I'd read with Naomi, she was talking about you know, this is also what we do. This is what our work, you know. So of course we're going to need time off too. Like, you act like we're all like robots or something that we just pump out and we're able to just do this. Someone else had said something like, you know, these athletes are not born great, and you all are great. But what she meant was, you're not born at the level of, you know, that you acquired, or that during all of those years to get to where you were, right? So it's not like you're born that superhero. So that, I think that that's a great point. I'm going to single you out, Sam, for just a moment, because I wanted to kind of come back to what it was that you were kind of talking about earlier, as far as having your old school mentality and thinking like your father, as you had mentioned. So then you are also a parent with 2 kids. And so at some point, they are also going to want to get into sports, or potentially want to get into sports. And so have you thought about how you would almost coach them, parent them into the sort of mindset that they should have as they're playing sports?
Good question. Yeah. So yeah, I have 2 girls. So I think that has given me a really interesting perspective. I guess if you can maybe comparing it to boys, I was, you know, maybe it's me, but I've always, in my family, this is like a little dynamic where there's a difference between how the boys and the girls are treated from both parents. You know, at least in you know, the traditional Nigerian culture, like, you know, for the most part, like the oldest is always kind of, you know, looked on as almost like a third parent, right? And then and the boys are just, you know, just naturally expected to be tougher, right? Girls expect to be tough too. Don't get me wrong, but you know, boys, it's not even like a question, right? Like if you show any kind of, not weakness, but like, yeah, if you make excuses or whatever, like, you know, people roll their eyes and stuff like that, right? So I take that mindset into account when I'm dealing with my girls or whatever, and still try to, you know, look at them as individuals in that regard. So like, you know, and the first thing that I always, at least, you know, looking at my experience, is when it comes to sports, one, I would never force my kids into any sport that they didn't want to do. I would encourage them to try different sports or different activities physically, just because I think there's just major life lessons and social interactions that you, in my opinion, you can't really get from a lot of other things, right? Like in terms of teamwork, you know, accountability, that sort of thing. Yeah, and just, you know, and pushing yourself, right? So my thing is like, you know, first, like, you know, have fun. Like having fun is the first and foremost, right? Like, you know, so to get into a sport and they just not having fun for whatever reason, you know, either we change, you know, the place that they're doing it at, or just, you know, move on to some other activity. That's one. 2, I'd want to instill in them, like, you know, the concept of accountability, right? Like and teamwork and working and working within a group, right? To meet, whatever demands that is, right? And I think that's very important. Like that's just a naturally important life lesson. But then on top of that, also like a big thing that I've always instilled, even at a young age, to my oldest, who's 11, is to speak up when she isn't comfortable with something, and not to be scared to, say something. If not to her teacher, her coach, definitely to me or her mom. Like, never be scared to bring something up, right? Because and I always tell her, like, one of my pet peeves is that she would do is like, Della, what's wrong? Nothing. Della. It's like, I can tell you, suddenly it's like, you sure? Like, no, it's okay. Like, no, like, I can't stand that. Like, like, obviously something's wrong. And then if you don't talk about it now, like, it's not like it's just going to go away. Right. And, and I try to like, instill in her, and maybe it's my fault. Cause like, sometimes like, my dad comes out in me where, maybe she's hesitant to open up. Right. But I'm like, I find, if you feel that way, then go to your mom, do something. Right. Because, my personal like nightmare, right, is like, what happens to, some of these girls that, you find out like they were mentally or physically taken advantage of or abused, right, by like a mentor, right, like, and that'll ruin, a child's like experience with a sport, and just, people in life in general.
And that's a great point. That's a great point. And I think that that's important too, right? To make sure that, and I think that that is also stressed a lot more than it was before, because I think that we also come from an era where our parents may have said something about, being seen and not heard. And I don't think that we are really enforcing that as much now. And it is a matter of making sure that people feel heard and that they're able to have that space to express themselves and to express their opinions on different things. So that was a great point for sure. So sorry, this is my last sort of question. And again, for both of you, from the coaching aspect of it, then what is it that you feel like you implement within your own coaching now that is different from what it was that you experienced growing up?
That's a great question. I believe that, I'm fortunate because I had a couple of really great coaches that encouraged me to develop the talent that was already there. But I also, we always also have the coaches who try to encourage you to develop a talent that's not there. And that's not necessarily wrong per se, but sometimes it's not the correct approach. One example is I was a great sprinter. As a girl, a really great long jumper. I was not a hurdler. That does not mean that I did not have one coach that every week would be like, you're doing hurdles. And every week I'd bust myself all up to the point where at some point you get scared to do it. You get scared to try. It makes you question whether you want to do the sport at all. And so one of the things that I really try to champion is why it was that I liked the coaches that were there, that were instrumental in to me, not just becoming a really good athlete, but a good person, a hardworking person, a person who valued team, a person who shows up on time, and all of the other things that you get from being in a sport that's not just the activity of playing the sport. And I try to put that into the practices with the kids. So I coach a large range of kids, but I start with 5th graders up through 12th grade. That's the age range of student athletes that I work with. And each level, they're coming in with different physical abilities, different motor control, different aspirations. So I always start every season asking them, what is it that you want to work on this year? What is it something that you would like to focus on? If you could come up with 3 goals that you would like to accomplish for yourself by the end of the season, what are them? Write them down, and then I read them all and I take it to heart. And as we're going through different drills and practices, and if I explain why and how this ties back into some of the goals and the things that they've put. I also make sure to include an element of play. So 2 days in the season, I may have the captains lead the practice, right? So the captains, they know the warm up by now, they know the routine, and the captains can make it their own fun little twist. And then for the small kids, we always do we do a party, and we try to make it just a lot of fun. And it's a huge sampler of events. We're not working on perfection at all. We're just getting out there with, these are all of the different things that you could do. Let's try several of them and see which ones you like. And then don't get too attached, because as you grow, as your body changes, you may find yourself more geared towards something else, and that's okay too. I think that taking that caring approach, when I was running, if you got hurt, you got injured, nobody, unless it was broken, nobody wanted to know. I mean, I remember playing basketball games with my fingers taped and jammed, right? And with my students, I always tell them, this is not a professional career. This is a learning experience after school. If you are hurt, if something doesn't feel good, I need you to tell me. I can't feel what you can feel. I can see sometimes when you're running and I think you might be injured, but I need you to get checked out by the athletic trainer. I want to pull you. I'm pulling you off. You can rest. If you miss this practice, this meet, guess what? That there will be more. But if we run you today, the risk that you would never be able to compete or recover from that injury is just too high with all of the information that we know. And that is something very different than the coaching experience. I mean, I can't remember a full year of any season where I wasn't taped in some way or another, right? And there's get back out there and go. And of course, then injuries delay, injuries don't heal. Eventually things break down. And so I really take that approach with the students. And then I also really focus on sport progression. We start with fundamentals and then we progress. And if they're not ready for the next step, then they're not ready for the next step. We don't move on. We can't just skip from foundation to 400-meter hurdles.
Yeah. I gotta say, honestly, like if all our coaches were like Kaylin and did what she just said, like we have like the next generation will be amazing, right? Because I co-sign and like pick up everything she just said, right? Like and she probably put it more eloquently, but I love how she implemented the why, which is something I really always try to bring everything back to the why, like why, there's a reason, why is a kid here at like your track practice as opposed to like basketball practice, right? Or, if you like just ask the why, half the time, you'll have your, direction, your answer, right? Like, and it'll give you like obviously like a lot of insight into the kid. Another great thing that I try to do that Kaylin mentioned, that is tying it to their goals, right? Like, reminding them why they're here. And also the way she implemented the that self-direction, right? And bringing it back to that autonomy is big, really big, right? Like, because half the time, like, as kids, like, everything is pretty much, our lives are pretty much directed by the adults. In our lives, right? Like, they tell us when to get up, where to go to school, damn near what we're gonna do when we grow up as a profession, right? So giving kids that like autonomy to direct their own like lives, like, is big, right? And that's where they're gonna get that internal motivation, right? Another thing that I try to implement with my younger athletes is that Kaylin does is to let them know, like, your accomplishments or failures on the field, on the court, are not, they're not really a reflection of who you are, right? Like, you could, hit that game-winning shot, right? Or, get first place in that race, like, that's great, like, and that should be celebrated, right? But it doesn't mean that, you'll always, be first place, and that's okay. Like, right, you can be first place in something else, right? Or even if you don't, right, like, then just use it to motivate you, to the next thing, right? Bringing everything back to what you do and like the effort that you put in. It's gonna sound cheesy, but you doing your best. The reason why that still kind of applies is just because talent can only get you so far, right? But if you get that self equity, right, and that like self determination to like do like the best you can do, even if you don't like get anywhere with it, you take that mentality everywhere else in life. That's what's more important.
Right. And that's you've been setting me up this whole call. That brings us to my final thought. And it has to do with the identity and how important it is during these times of the adolescents, like they're growing up, they're trying to figure out who they are, right? So a lot of you as coaches are so instrumental in providing that for them. Kaylin, you remember your coach's name, right? I don't even remember teachers' names from, elementary school and middle school and stuff like that. To remember someone's name means that they made a huge impact on you growing up, and it's something that you implement into how it is that you now train people and children yourself, so this is a really key thing that I think for us to remember, is that these are those times for these kids. And so not only are they competing, and we shouldn't make it so serious, because this is something then that they take away with them potentially for the rest of their life, as far as what it is that develops them into the bigger human beings that they will become. So kudos to you both. Like, what I felt like I heard that I really liked was really understanding that each person is an individual. So even Sam, when you were talking about your daughters, and Kaylin, when you're talking about the different people on your team, each person is a separate person, and it makes no difference, like with your daughters, that they are both in the same household. They're both two different ages. They're both treated differently, not on purpose, but just by design. You have different things that you encounter with these two different people, to where you would interact with them differently. And the same with you, Kaylin, as far as like with your coaching, and you have these different kids, really assessing them for who they are individually is important, because you can't treat them all as the same person. They're not all going to compete the same way. And you learn you can't coach them that way, because then that's not, they aren't responsive to that. Like, some people are responsive to certain things, and you understand, then you have to change things up for others. So that's really, really good. And then also just encouraging the conversation, just like we're having today, encouraging that conversation and making sure that people feel that they can speak up and speak out about these different things. So I know, Sam, that you were commending Kaylin's points, which were great, but I think that both of you are proving that you are making an impact on these children's lives. And I think that that's amazing, and it's important. So thank you both for joining me. We've got like a minute left. If you don't mind just sharing with our audience just really quick where they can find you, social media and that sort of thing. I'll make sure and post that on the description.
Oh yeah, so you can find me Instagram and Facebook at SamFitNYC, Twitter as well. It's the same handle. And SamFitness at Gmail. If anyone wants to send me an email, I forgive me, I take probably a good 48 hours to get to my inbox, just because I literally have a couple hours where I okay, now I'll look at emails. But yeah, you'll find me there.
Thank you.
I love your approach to checking emails, Sam. I should probably get on your plane and set emails to kind of roll my life. Hundreds a day. If I waited to 2 days to check those emails, I'd be in the weeds. I'd never get out. You can find, I'm everywhere. You can find me on Instagram, MaxFit360. You can find me on Twitter at MaxFit360. You can find me on Facebook at MaxFit360. You can find me on Tumblr, Snapchat. I'm literally everywhere. But if you really just, and you can DM me through any of those. But if you really just want to send me an email, you can send it to Kaylin, Kaylin, at maxfit360.fit. And yes, that's how you can find me.
Thank you, Kaylin. Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for your time and for giving your information. I hope that people found it helpful. I thought that it was. And that is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.